For more than 50 years, Ozzy Osbourne has been one of the most recognizable figures in rock music. The Prince of Darkness, the frontman of Black Sabbath, the man who bit the head off a bat. But somewhere along the way, a strange myth developed about Ozzy. A lot of people believe he wasn't really a musician at all, just a voice singing Geezer Butler's lyrics over Tony Iommi's riffs. In other words, Ozzy was kind of an accidental rock star. If you look closely at how Black Sabbath actually wrote their music and at Ozzy's career after Sabbath, that myth starts to fall apart pretty quickly. And I'm going to tell you right now what people still get wrong about Ozzy Osbourne and why his musical role in heavy metal history is much bigger than you may believe. One of the most common assumptions about Ozzy is that he was simply the vocalist in Black Sabbath. The story usually goes something like this. Tony Iommi wrote the riffs, Geezer Butler wrote the lyrics, and Ozzy just showed up and sang them. But that description ignores something extremely important about how rock bands actually write songs, especially in the case of Black Sabbath. The vocal melody in Sabbath is one of the most important creative elements in their entire song structure, and that was Ozzy's territory. During the early years of Black Sabbath, the band's songwriting process was very collaborative. Tony Iommi would often bring in riffs. The band would jam on those riffs together, and Ozzy would begin developing vocal melodies over the top. Only after those melodies existed would Geezer Butler often finalize the lyrics. In other words, Ozzy wasn't just delivering words, he was creating the melodic identity of the song. Think about classics like Iron Man or War Pigs or Paranoid. Strip away Ozzy's vocal melodies and those songs would feel completely different. That haunting, slightly eerie phrasing became one of the defining sounds of early heavy metal. Didn't come from a guitar, didn't come from the drums, didn't come from the bass, it came from Ozzy. Another thing people sometimes overlook is that Ozzy's voice works in a very unusual way. Technically, he's not a typical power singer in the mold of later metal vocalists. Instead, Ozzy's strength is melodic instinct and tone. His voice floats above Tony Iommi's dark riffs in a way that almost feels ghost-like. It's one of the reasons early Black Sabbath recordings sound so eerie and atmospheric. That contrast, the heavy guitar below and almost haunting melody above, became a blueprint for countless heavy metal bands that followed, but never quite got it right, because it was Ozzy who helped shape and define that sound. Ozzy had simply been a mouthpiece for the ideas of Tony Iommi and Geezer Butler. His career would have ended when he left Black Sabbath in 1979. Something very different happened. Ozzy went on to create an entirely new era of music with guitarist Randy Rhoads, and Blizzard of Oz introduced a new style of melodic heavy metal, again based around vocal hooks created by Ozzy Osbourne. Similarly, with his work with Zakk Wylde, Ozzy continued to produce songs that carried a vocal personality. Different musicians, different eras, same unmistakable Ozzy sound and contribution. Part of the misunderstanding around Ozzy probably comes from his public image. Over the years, he's been portrayed as chaotic, unpredictable, and even ridiculous. But the reality is that Ozzy has always been a very sharp, melodic composer and very smart about atmosphere. Two things that are absolutely central to good and even great songwriting. In fact, there's a strange and little known story about Ozzy Osbourne that I recently explored in a members only video here on MusicGuru. This video talks about how Ozzy quietly read the Bible backstage before some concerts, and that's about as far from the public image of Prince of Darkness as you can imagine. So if you're curious about that story, find it in the members section of the channel. Now, I want to say a quick thank you to everyone who helped support MusicGuru. Some of you have joined as members, which really helps these videos keep going. Others have used the super thanks feature below the video, which is another way you can support my work here. None of that support is expected, but it's always appreciated, and it helps me keep making more deep dives into rock history like this one. So let's get down to brass tacks about things that Ozzy Osbourne did that he had a hands-on influence over. Starting from the earliest days, with the song Black Sabbath, Ozzy wrote those lyrics. The song The Writ, Ozzy wrote those lyrics. Fairies Wear Boots, Ozzy wrote those lyrics. Who Are You? Ozzy wrote the music and the main synthesizer parts for that song. Wicked World, Ozzy handled the lyrics. And every classic Black Sabbath song, Ozzy contributed top lines, vocal lines, catchy melodies that sit on top of the riff. The same goes for the input that Ozzy had during his solo career. He kept to the same pattern even though the song styles and overall tones changed. Now, there is a famous case of the song Spiral Architect, where Ozzy Osbourne was an influence over the orchestration. It had something to do with guiding the way that the strings were arranged, even though he wasn't credited for it. So what we're dealing with when we talk about Ozzy and his musical talent is basically a strong but very unrefined musical talent. He wasn't fluid on an instrument, and he wasn't taught about how to use his gift. He only had his voice to transmit it. And if you ask me, I think he did a great job of becoming a musical counterpart in a band with so many talented people. So to me, he wasn't just a vocalist, because the melodies that carry Black Sabbath songs into people's memories are just as important as any other part. And almost all of those melodies came from Ozzy himself.
There's another angle we can take on this, which is to simply imagine Black Sabbath without Ozzy Osbourne. For a moment, imagine that Ronnie James Dio or Ian Gillan fronted Black Sabbath from the very beginning. How would that have changed the band? Well, in my opinion, had Black Sabbath had any other singer in its early days than Ozzy Osbourne, they would have been quickly forgotten. Not because the material isn't good, but because the material would not have been as fully realized as it was with Ozzy Osbourne. Now, part of the reason for this, of course, is the vocal melodies that I've been referencing. And part of the reason is the fact that Ozzy Osbourne seemed to understand the pulse and tempo not only of Black Sabbath, but of Black Sabbath's emerging audience. Ozzy made a connection, a human-to-human connection with Black Sabbath's listeners I don't feel was ever replicated by another vocalist in the band. While Ronnie James Dio was a great frontman and created some incredible songs with Black Sabbath, he never attained the same kind of connection with the audience as Ozzy.
This means that the Prince of Darkness wasn't just the face of one of the most important bands in rock history. He was one of the musical architects behind it. That's something people still get wrong about Ozzy Osbourne. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time here on Music Guru.
Music Guru here, asking you to help us on our march to 10,000 subscribers.